In this episode, we look at the upcoming Queensland state election, a bit more on the success of the National Gun Conference, and the exploding guns in Western Australia. And welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded. And we're going to be covering the Queensland state election, which will be held on the 26th of October. So I know this is only coming out a couple of days before then, but it's important that if you're a shooter in Queensland that you understand what's happening with the approach to gun laws by both the Labor and the LNP parties. And we're going to also be looking at some of the past elections we've had in the last few weeks. Obviously another look at WA again. A little bit about the AAA Shot Expo that was held in Melbourne over the last weekend, and a couple of other little things on the way through. So if we look at the last result for Western Australian state election, now bear in mind Western Australia goes to the polls in March next year. Western Australia Liberal Party is pretty much not even a shadow of itself. So if we go to the results from that last election, you'll see that the Labor government absolutely trounced the LNP over there. That is the Liberal and the National parties. They're not combined as one over there, but you can see there that Labor had 53 seats that they won. The Liberal and National parties had 6. So in fact, the National Party has more MPs in Parliament than the Liberal Party, and so when we call the Liberal Party Labor Light, then that is what that's a reference to, and it's why they are not going to get any traction from the electorate until they start differentiating themselves from Labor and stop trying to pander to left-wing politics. Now, the issue for shooters in WA isn't just about gun laws, it's about the go soft on crime approach, and that's coming up also in the Queensland context, where we've seen the Queensland Labor government do some pretty ordinary things when it comes to both treating firearm owners, but also just failing to actually separate out, what might actually be a concern to them, and that is about the misuse of firearms by those who shouldn't have them, and that's why this matters to every single shooter. Now, we have been particularly disappointed, I think, by the approach of obviously Labor in WA and the Liberal Party. Neither side wants to talk with shooters. They go running. Now, there are a couple of exceptions on the Liberal side of the camp. You've got Nick Gorrin, who abstained from voting to the changes to the WA firearm laws that went through recently, and Steve Thomas, who's a Liberal MP who we interviewed on this show fairly recently. And there's a couple of good candidates in the Liberal camp as well who want to shake things up, but they're not able to do that at the moment. To give you an idea of how bad Labor is, we wrote to quite a few MPs over the course of several weeks, and Sue Ellery, who's the member for South Metropolitan Region, who's a Labor MP, was good enough to respond to us, but unable to fill our request for an interview. So, that's weak. They don't even want to speak with shooters. And look, I can't say much more about what's happening in WA because you all know the story, and you've all got an opportunity to vote that way in a few months' time. If we turn then to the Northern Territory, they went to the polls a few weeks ago, and interestingly enough, what happened there was a complete reversal of how the electorate viewed Labor, and these are results from the last 2 elections in the Northern Territory. And you'll see that in 2020, Labor held a very commanding lead over the country Liberal Party, 14 seats to 8, with 3 going to others. I think there was a couple of independents and maybe a Green there. That was quite a big margin in the context of the Territory. And then you've got the result from the recent election where it just went completely the opposite direction. The country Liberal Party, 17 seats, Labor 4. So, and whilst that didn't turn about on the back of the shooting issue, viewers might be aware of our interview with Gerard Maley, who is the deputy leader of the CLP, and he he's very much a shooter. We spoke at length with him about his interest in shooting and what he sees needs to be changed, and actually have a very good pro-shooting policy that is now part of the government's agenda, and we look forward to that. And that included investment in hunting. It included some changes to the Firearms Act that were problematic, and also some investment in hunting resources. So that was a good outcome for shooters. It's the only state at this stage where we've had good outcomes for shooters, unfortunately. The ACT also recently went to the election, and that was just a few days ago. Now, I appreciate that the territory is probably less interest to shooters in the main states, but bear in mind I'm talking here about a trend. And what we have here is we're looking at the results from the ACT election, and Labor did win 10 seats to 8, a couple going to the Greens and others. But that's also there was actually a gain from the Liberal position from the previous election. So it's actually a good result for Liberal. It's just not good enough. And I think, again, for shooters, we're just trying to make the point that we've got Labor to Labor governments wall to wall around Australia, other than I think the Tasmania, and we've not seen a lot come for shooters, but you can turn governments around if you vote the right way. And just with the ACT election, the Labor vote dropped quite a lot. The Liberal vote went up, but not by as much. What happened was that there was another party called Independents for Canberra who vacuumed up a lot of votes from Labor, and it just didn't find its way to the Liberal party. But I think those results actually mask what was probably a more significant swing against Labor than perhaps the numbers are telling us. So some of those votes may have gone back to Labor through preference allocations, but on the face of it, it was actually quite a big result. So getting back to the Queensland election, most shooters in Queensland will have some options to choose from to vote pro-gun. And it's important they do. I mean, sure, there's other things that matter to the way we live. There's the economy, there's roads, there's a whole range of things. But as a shooter, you'd be very much aware of some of the things the government's been doing to shooters, the governments around Australia have been doing to shooters, and also the risks that are still there from bad policies. The Queensland government recently tried to push through a community safety bill, as they call it, that actually that was going to do some real damage to the shooting sports and the ability of people like you to appeal against decisions to take your gun license off you, because that is what some shooters have been facing. Now, thanks to the work of the Shooters Union, that the package of laws was changed, but it's still a problem that we're having with Labor governments around Australia. Now, we have wall-to-wall Labor governments, which is why I'm picking on Labor, other than in Tasmania where they have a Liberal government. But you've got to send a message to Labor that this is not good enough. They have been taking what is really a pro-crime position by having a blanket approach on, as in a negative approach to firearm ownership, by punishing those who comply with the law, and that's how it's to be seen. The laws that Labor is putting in many states is really criminal friendly, because it's not actually going after them, it's going after you. And so that's why you need to kick them out. When you vote, don't just roll into the polling booth half an hour before the polls close, because you might rush your vote. You might be caught in between having to pick the kids up and then go to the hardware store and get the back deck ready for your in-laws coming around that evening for a barbie. But if you do that, if you rush your vote, you've got to make mistakes. You're going to not think about who you're voting for and just vote with old habits. And that might be, if your dad always voted Labor and, you always voted Labor, or if you voted the LNP last election because you did that the election before, and that becomes your guiding mechanism, that's where you're making a mistake. Think about what the party that's in power and what the government's doing and what you can do with your vote to try to send that message, because every vote does count. Sometimes your vote may not be enough to change the result in a particular election, but I'll guarantee you there are many other shooters in your electorate who are thinking the same thing, so you can actually change the result around. Now, just before I get off elections, and particularly Western Australia, there are a couple of things worth going back to. First of all, was an amazing story that appeared online a little while ago, and this is just how insane the management of firearm laws in Western Australia has gotten. But the Western Australia Police literally put together an explosion of firearms that had been handed in through their recent buyback. So now I'm not going to show you the full story, but you get the idea. Now, just consider this. When there's an explosion of solid objects, what do you think could happen? Sure, one outcome is some might be destroyed, but the other outcome of an explosion is it just simply scatters stuff around. So, you know, if there's people hunting the Western Australian outback looking for some surrendered firearms, then just ask the police where to find them, and I'm sure that that you will. Now, the other interesting thing that we picked up from Western Australia is what looks to be like a significant change in attitude by the AAA in Western Australia. They donated $50,000 to the National Party. Now, bear in mind, the National Party is the only party in Western Australia, apart from some other minor parties, Libertarians and others, who have been standing up for shooters. So they made a $50,000 donation to the WA Nationals. Now, I would say, and this is despite the fact that I've been very critical of the way the AAA and WA has behaved in the past, I think that was a pretty smart thing. They're getting directly involved in the election process, and visibly so, because what happens is that donations do get publicly reported. And here you can see the disclosure by the Nationals of the $50,000 that was donated to them from the AAA in WA. It's interesting that we're seeing this. It actually comes on the back of the National Gun Conference, where we saw from the AAA head office, I think, a very different approach to dealing with our problems in the political arena, being prepared to jump in there and fight on the issues, play the ball, not the man. And suddenly we're seeing that happen in WA. So I'm speculating there's some coaching going on, but be that as it may, doesn't matter. That was a good thing. I just hope that AAA and WA can keep up that what they're doing. Speaking of the National Gun Conference, it was very encouraging to see the results of what we did online. And bear in mind that Politics Reloaded still has a very small reach. We're still fairly young. We've only really been around for about a year or so. We're still just building things. But that summary of the key themes that we put together, it's about a 23-minute video. They got over 6,000 views, which, for the size of our channel is pretty good. Had over 1,200 reactions and over 100 shares on Facebook. So we're very, very encouraged by that. So just before we get on to the AAA Shot Expo in Melbourne, you would have heard our ads on this podcast. And I've got to say that you need to listen to these sort of podcasts if you're a shooter. It's the best way to get the news that you need. Now, we've already interviewed people like David Lanehelm, current and past MPs and candidates. We've interviewed the Shooters Union, Dan Repiccioli. We also held the National Gun Conference with David Lanehelm and former Senator Nigel Scullion, AAA CEO Tom Kenyon, David Brown from Shooters Union, Canada's Australia Party, Nick Demetto, the Libertarian Party, and I'll mention the Nationals again, Bridget McKenzie. Now, this is quality stuff. It's easy to listen to and helps get important information out to other shooters, and provides a platform for political candidates to give shooters good reasons as to why there are better options that are available to you when you vote. But that information is there. Now, you can help make this a bigger and better platform by becoming a member of Politics Reloaded or donating to Politics Reloaded. You can do both through the links at the bottom of the description to this podcast. What you can do by supporting us. It's easy, it's necessary, and it's such an important way to protect our political future. And also I want to talk to you about why Politics Reloaded is particularly, important to support. We're the ones putting out the hard-hitting and accurate articles on stories that matter to shooters, and we're taking the legal actions and saved probably 20 firearm licence holders this year, and others from losing their licences, and helped them with questions about the situations they've found themselves in. And we are also the ones who are providing important how to vote advice for other shooters, not just you who've obviously heard what we've got to say, but there's other shooters out there who need to get the same message. We're also the organisation who worked with the Shooters Union and setting up and running the National Gun Conference, which we all need to bring around political change. And that is to provide a whole of industry approach to a whole of industry problem. And you can do that by backing us, and membership's just $30 a year. So that's all it is. I talked about a whole of industry approach. I recently attended the AAA Shot Expo in Melbourne, which was on the 19th and 20th of October. I won't cover sort of my full report on that now. It'll more likely be in the next podcast. But I will just give a bit of a snippet by saying there are a couple of industry players who had exhibits at the Shot Expo who clearly don't want to share the stage with others. People who were invited to participate in the National Gun Conference, and I'll just say that one of them, and I'll give more information later, was saying that that's a cancer on the industry. So how on earth, working together to bring to you a National Gun Conference where we talk about the problems affecting shooters around the place is a cancer on the industry, defies imagination, and that comes from one of the biggest names around. Not the AAA, but it is one of the big names, and I'll be telling you more about that later. And just finally, to close, the Victorian wildlife regulations. Now we had an interview with Danny Ryan, who's from the Victorian Duck Hunters Association recently, about what it means for hunters in Victoria. It's a solid interview, and it's one that's definitely worth watching. In amongst the comments that came back, there was one person who said that we need to be like the American NRMA. Now, the NRMA stands for, I think it's the New South Wales Road, whatever it is. It's equivalent to the RACV, the RACQ, the automotive, whatever it is, AAT in South Australia, and the AANT. So if you want aggressive roadside assistance, then I would suggest that we need an aggressive NRMA. We know what they were talking about. It just didn't quite come out that way. So that was good. That's it for this episode. Thank you once again. We'll be back again, as I said, shortly with information on the Shot Expo and some other things. But if you're voting this weekend in Queensland, again, take your time, actually look at who's on the ballot paper, and if you can, please follow the Shooters Union advice. Put pro candidates, pro candidates up first, and then the LNP, Labor, and then the Greens in that order down the bottom of your ticket. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.